Okay, good evening, everybody here who's watching us from Israel, and those of us who have joined from America, the United Kingdom, or anywhere else in the world that you're on the same time zone. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, good middle of the night, maybe if someone's on from Australia. And thank you so much for joining our Aliyah Inspired event here at Nefesh B'Nefesh. Aliyah Inspired is a month-long online series of webinars and panels about Aliyah and inspiration. And this evening, it is wonderful to be hosting the LGBTQ plus panel with some really incredible guests who we are excited to hear their stories and share with you a bit of their Aliyah and their inspiration. My name is Josh Brook, and I am a proud staff member of Nefesh B'Nefesh, and I am super happy to be here with all of you. I'd like to welcome our incredible guests that are joining us this evening. Roy, Nathan, Natty, and Alex, thank you all so much for taking time, for joining in and being willing to share a bit about yourselves and your stories. So to get the evening going, to get us kicked off, we're going to just start. Everyone, just your name, where you're from, when and with, where you made Aliyah, to what you do now, where you live, and yeah, a little bit about your Aliyah story. Let's start with that and we'll get rolling. Roy, why don't you take it away?
Hi, yes, so my name is Roy Freeman. I made Aliyah in 2012. I'm originally from the UK, but lived in Sydney, Australia before I made Aliyah. I made Aliyah with my now husband. We were just boyfriends at the time, but I met him in Sydney and decided to take the plunge and make Aliyah so that we could be together. I work in high tech. I'm a technical instructor. And in my, that's my day job. And as we joke in the community, my gay job is running LGBT Olim, which I started in 2013 to build a community for LGBTQ people that have made Aliyah. And so we run regular social events so that people can meet friends, meet people, and build a social network without first having to be fluent in Ivrit. And so at the moment, obviously for the last year, we've been doing a lot of stuff online. We've been doing, weekly movie nights and comedy nights and online Shabbat dinners and online coffee mornings and that kind of stuff. But thankfully, now that the vaccine is starting to roll out pretty well in Israel, we've actually started to have some real events again. So, Purim party, a belated Purim party last week, and we've got some more stuff coming up over the next few months as well. The other thing that LGBT Olim does, as well as the English speakers groups and social events, is Kulpan, which literally just finished now. We have basically Kulpan is LGBT friendly Hebrew classes. Again, for the last year, these have been online, but hopefully soon we're planning to return to the LGBTQ centers in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Jerusalem. And we're going to maintain an online presence there as well, because over the last year, a lot of people have been joining us from overseas, people that are planning to make Aliyah, not just the people that already have. So that's Kulpan. So I would love everyone here, if you're planning on making Aliyah, I'd love you to get in touch. You can find us on Facebook, just search for LGBT space Olim. We also have a website, which is relatively new, lgbtolim.org. So you can find out more about the organization and what we do. What else would you like to know? Is that enough for now?
Yeah, that's lovely, Roy. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you.
Alex, maybe you take it away.
Okay, so hello, everyone. My name is Alex Sanchez, and I'm originally from New Jersey, and I made Aliyah 2 years ago, and I currently live in Rishon LeZion, and I work both as a high school English teacher and also as a lecturer at the College of Management Academic Studies here in Rishon. I'm also a constant nuisance in Israeli politics and like to be involved in Olim events, and occasionally dabble elsewhere in LGBTQ advocacy in the country. So I live in Rishon and my work is mostly in education.
Amazing, thanks so much. Nathan?
Hi, my name is Nathan. I'm 24 years old, born and raised in Connecticut. I graduated from the University of Connecticut in 2019 and made Aliyah straight after. Just a little bit about my Aliyah story. I kind of knew for a while that I wanted to make Aliyah, so I went on pretty much every possible Israel experience program that you can think of in college. So I made Aliyah in August of 2019. So now already just over a year and a half. I live in Jerusalem and I work at the Jewish Agency for Israel. And I'm here. A lot of stuff in the community obviously hasn't been going on, as Roy mentioned, because of COVID and whatnot. I kind of came right before everything started hitting. But fortunately for myself, because of all my different experiences and trips here before, I kind of started to find my footing here. So also my study abroad is where I met my boyfriend, and he lives in Sur Adasa, which is right around the Jerusalem area. So he's definitely been a rock for me, but also slowly finding my footing a bit more as things do start to happen more within the Jerusalem LGBT community.
Thanks, Nathan. Natty?
Hi, I'm Natalie or Nati, whatever you prefer. I'm originally from the Bay Area in Northern California, but I actually haven't lived there for quite some time. I made Aliyah in July 2017, so coming up on 4 years this July. And my main motivation to move to Israel was for my amazing girlfriend, because we had been in a long distance relationship. So that was the main reason. But I moved here just from finishing my master's in Australia. So I was also really motivated to find a job in my field and continue building my career. So because my field, it's marine biology. So it's a bit of a small field here. I was super lucky to actually find a job here at Tel Aviv University for about 2 years. And then recently I have undertaken a PhD. Well, not super recently, I'm coming up on also 2 years, but that's kind of where I'm at now. So before, when I lived in Tel Aviv, when I was at Tel Aviv University, I lived in Holon, which is a suburb just outside of Tel Aviv and also close to Rishon. But now I live in Jerusalem in a neighborhood called Rehavia. So that's where I'm at now. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Fantastic. Thank you all so much for being here. It's so wonderful to kind of, in the time we have together, get to know each other and spend a little bit of time talking about the awesome community that we all find ourselves to be a part of. So also I feel like it's weird if I don't introduce myself. So as I said before, my name is Josh Brook. I did not make Aliyah with Nefesh B'Nefesh, as maybe you can tell from my accent. I made Aliyah from South Africa 10 years ago. I live in Jerusalem with my partner, Graham, who he made Aliyah from America, from Texas. He did make Aliyah through Nefesh B'Nefesh, but that's not how we met. And I work in the public relations team at Nefesh B'Nefesh. The first question, which I think really pertains very clearly and interestedly to kind of this whole idea of Aliyah inspiration. And it's kind of a question that can easily be yes and can easily be no. Do you feel that your sexual orientation or identity played a role at all in your making Aliyah? If yes, feel free to share. If it's a straight up no, then that's fantastic. Alex, let's start with you.
Okay, so I am a transgender woman, and when I was moving to Israel, I had a lot of question marks over my head because I wasn't coming here to make Aliyah. I was actually coming here to work in a Masa program, which was Masa Israel Teaching Fellows. And I'm a certified teacher back in New Jersey and also in Israel. And so the big question mark for me was, well, are people going to invite me to be a teacher in Israel? And that was a very big question mark that I held over myself for over a year before I finished my application. And I had faced a lot of no's when I was applying for jobs in New Jersey as a transgender woman and as an educator. And it was, kind of a shock to me that I was, very well qualified, had a lot of experience, but couldn't break through a certain barrier in terms of when people saw a trans person and didn't know how to respond to that in a school. And when I made the move to Israel, I remember, having this conversation with my principal at the school that I went to work in Ramle. And, I said to my principal, I said, did they tell you that I was, trans before, you accepted me as a teacher? And she said, yes. And I said, well, you were fine with that? That was okay. And she said, an American English teacher coming to teach in Ramle? Of course I'm okay with that. And so, I had a lot of really positive experiences that I was not expecting. I had no intention of making Aliyah. I told my previous employer, keep my job open. I'm coming back after 10 months. And now it's been like 3 years almost. And so I really felt in terms of employment, that as someone who has a queer identity, there's a lot of network available, a lot of community available to find support as LGBTQ people in the workplace, and especially as educators. I kind of went through the process of finding employment by myself. And it was kind of a shock to me, because I thought, okay, maybe I got lucky and found like the one very welcoming, accepting teacher in Israel. And when I decided to stay and look for another job, within, telling my supervisor I was looking for another placement, I had 20 different schools calling me, asking me to come and interview with them. And so I had a very different experience of being seen for the quality of the work that I do and what I bring to a school and to a classroom and to a learning community, as opposed to being seen as, a liability because we're not sure about having a trans person working at our school. And so it was a very big, shock to me, because people have this mentality that, Israel, the Middle East, you're not going to be so successful if you're queer or if you're trans specifically, and trying to find a place in that society. And I would argue that I found the opposite. Like, I really found a home here. And I really found a really vast network of not just, progressive, liberal people, but also, very religious people in the community that I lived in, who, kept me at Shabbat dinner every Friday, going to with their houses and families. So it was a shock to me. And I think that, seeing the reaction of the people that I was living with and working with, kind of cemented in my brain that this is where I need to be.
Thank you so much, Alex. Roy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I originally thought about making Aliyah back in 1997, so I would have been in my 20s then. And at the time, I think I was still very much deeply in the closet. And I thought that making Aliyah would be solve all of my problems. It would be, I don't know, I wasn't sure exactly what it was. I came here for 10 days. I stayed with a cousin in Tel Aviv. And at the time, I decided that it wasn't for me, even though, and again, probably because I wasn't, I hadn't come out. I still wasn't okay with myself. Moving forward to 2012, making Aliyah, and again, the country has changed a lot since then. I was just thinking about it. In 1997, when I thought about making Aliyah, Dana hadn't even won Eurovision at that point. So we were talking about a very, very different Israel. The country has changed a lot. And
Pre and post Dana.
Exactly. It's my sexuality was part of making Aliyah, because I knew that Israel was a safe place to live, a gay life. So in that respect, yes. And of course, meeting an Israeli was a big part of it as well.
You do well. Natalie?
So I would say a bit yes and no. I think because I moved here for my girlfriend, so yes. But also it was something I considered, because I think in myself, it would be really difficult for me to live in a place where I couldn't openly be myself and, walk down the street holding my girlfriend's hand. But on the other side, there are places in Israel where we don't hold hands just because we don't want to, maybe get in a situation. So it is a protection thing as well. But there aren't many of those places. And it can be like when you move anywhere in the world, there's always going to be, this one area where maybe you're not going to be holding hands with your partner. But at the same time, I've never had any fear. I've like always been open in any place, in any space, you know, in the workplace, between friends, with people I just met, and I've never, you know, come across any issues. So I would say yes and no, but it's all been a really positive experience.
Fantastic. Nathan?
So I grew up in your very classic suburban Connecticut Jewish community, like the most Gimel girls possible, New England, small town, both Jewish community and not Jewish community, you know, very boxy, everyone homogeneous, the same upper white middle class type of vibes. And when I went to college is when I came out. That's kind of when I really found myself. I was always involved in Hillel, the JCC, these very pluralistic organizations where I could grow up very Zionistic, very strong in my Jewish identity. But on the other hand, being able to express myself and not be boxed in any way. And so, like I said earlier, the more that I came to Israel, the more I actually did find a home here, in the sense that it came to a point where I knew more people part of the LGBT community here in Israel and had more friends here that I really felt was my community than back at home. And something else that like really got me here and that I didn't have back there was the sense that on the basis everyone is Jewish. So I also identify as religious, and that's definitely something of contention that can come up. How can you be religious and gay? And here in Israel, because of the fact that everyone is Jewish just on the basis, I found that it was much easier to find that here for myself and not be boxed in any way, which is very contradictory to what I think a lot of people feel like sometimes here in Israel, specifically about the religious community. They feel like there's this balance and fight between religious and secular. And when they go to America, so they see this whole progressive society between reform, conservative, whatnot. And I actually feel completely opposite. I feel like that I actually can express myself more here in Israel because I can really just be whoever I want. There's no box into a certain denomination, a certain synagogue you go to. If I want to be religious and gay, I can. If I want to practice this way, I can. And I've never seen anything like that. And that really helped drive my feeling part of this being my home here in Israel, and then making Aliyah.
Thanks, Nathan. I'll actually add into that. Me and Nathan met each other for the first time when we went to a group in Jerusalem for religious queer men, if you will. It's called the Keshet Hasruga. Basically, in Hebrew, a knitted kippah is called a kippah sruga, which is basically what what religious Zionists, Datilumi people usually wear. And a keshet is a Hebrew word for a rainbow. So it's very, aptly named that way. And we met there. And it's a group that before Corona would meet often of like, young, old, across the entire, spectrum of like religious men kind of sharing their experience living in Israel, and obviously being somewhere on the LGBTQ spectrum. And I definitely agree with Nathan that I think for myself personally, one of the biggest things is that I knew that Israel was really one of the few places in the world where I would be able to kind of live my normal, if you call it my normal religious life. I go to synagogue, me and my partner, we sit together. There's people who know that we're a couple. There's people who just assume we're two friends sitting next to each other, each to his own world. And, it's a good, very, positive experience. And it's something that I think breaks the mold because it's a very strong, very existent community, especially in Jerusalem. And I'm sure that, Nathan can definitely agree with me, both of us being, living in Jerusalem and Natalie as well, that the LGBTQ community here is much larger and much broader than people really come to realize. Most people assume that LGBT is just, flags flying in Tel Aviv in the middle of the summer in a huge parade, but really there are huge communities in a lot of places across Israel, which is always really interesting and really exciting to see. I'm just going to answer two, I see Nefesh is answering the question. Roy, I'm going to let you take this one, if you don't mind. Someone asked, I'm a Black gay Jew. How do you think the experience will be different? Do you think the experience will be different based on race, seeing as you are the larger LGBTQ group expert, if you will? That's
a good question. I'd like to think not. We've had Black gay members before. Not so many Olim. No, actually, no, we have got members. So I'm just trying to think back. And we've also had people that come and go. So, you know, LGBT Olim isn't just for people that make Aliyah. We have people that are studying here, living here short term, moved here to be with their Israeli partner for whatever reason. And so, yes, you would definitely not be the only person of color within the group. I would like to think that you'd have a positive experience. So, yes, absolutely. Give it a try.
And I like to just add on to that also. You know, come from a family that's a mixed family of indigenous Mexican, Jewish, Ashkenazi, and also Black. And so I think my biggest, you know, kind of shock when I got here was my own misconceptions about Israel. And I think that there's a global misconception that, you know, Israel is a country of white Jewish people or Ashkenazim. And that's not the entire picture of this country. And one thing that, you know, really kind of took me by surprise when I moved here is the fact that I didn't feel alone being a person of color, because I was surrounded by other people of color, whether they be Ethiopian or Eritrean, or whether they be, you know, Jews from different parts of the world in India. And I think that was the biggest shock to me, was really kind of having to unlearn my own prejudgments about the country. Because I think that when we talk about Israel, especially, you know, from outside of Israel, we tend to have this imagined Ashkenazi country, and that's not the reality of Israel. And I would say don't be discouraged, because the truth in Israel is that there's a very large diversity of Jews who are living here, and we're all happy to welcome you here too. So.
Thank you so much. Yeah, go for it, Roy.
I struggled with for the first couple of years that I was here was, as you said, having to re-educate myself. I guess I admit now that I came here with baggage. I'd grown up having to deal with a lot of anti-Semitism. I'd had to deal with a lot of homophobia living in the UK and living in Australia. And coming to Israel, I expected not so much anti-Semitism, obviously, but I expected homophobia almost wherever I turned. And the experiences that I had finally, you know, led me to believe, you know, the penny finally dropped. Like, you know, dealing with Nefesh B'Nefesh, dealing with the Jewish Agency, going to them, meeting with people, talking to them about the LGBT community, and not dealing with hatred, not dealing with, you know, just not getting the responses I was expecting, and thinking, okay, I really need to go start these conversations, not expecting homophobia. Okay, I need to just go in there and start the conversation. And if I have to deal with homophobia, then I'll deal with it at the time. But the trepidation that I had of starting those conversations in the first place, I had to, you know, educate. I had to, you know, teach myself. It's like, well, I need to let go of that, because that's not how Israel works. Okay, the institutionalized homophobia that, you know, we've come to accept, unfortunately, in Western countries. It's, you know, I'm not going to say it doesn't exist, but it is, you know, infinitely smaller. And it's just, you know, I personally think it's a very safe place for, you know, an LGBT person to live.
Obviously, living in Israel, you know, as Alex beautifully said before, like in a country in the Middle East, where the, I would say, leading majority of the country is somewhat more, you know, conservative, if you will, in the way that they think and the way that they live their lives, also with religious majorities and minorities and whatnot. We have to obviously acknowledge that in Israel, there are challenges, you know, in being part of the LGBT community, not, you know, each their own in what they see. And one of the questions is kind of short, long, however you feel you need to answer. What for you has been maybe in your mind, the biggest challenge about being LGBTQ in Israel? And after moving here, did maybe that image or that idea of that challenge change? Nat, if you want to take us away with that one.
Sure. I think that like some of the other panelists, my misconceptions were maybe going to be about navigating certain spaces that I thought maybe not that I wouldn't be open, but that I would have to be a bit more gentle and maybe get to know people a bit more before I was able to, you know, share that with them. But I think that everything has been really fine, and I've had a really, like I said, positive experience. And yeah, I think that that was a misconception maybe I had, that I had to get to know people before I could just open up to them, but it's actually been the opposite. And I feel that I've been able to be way more open here than I have in previous areas of my life before moving here. And I would say, sorry, Josh, the second part was about challenges.
Yeah, that's kind of a challenge, perhaps, that you like. What do you feel is your challenge, in a sense?
That's a good question. I would say I do have some challenge with, or issues with, the institution of marriage in Israel for the LGBTQ plus community. And so I know a lot of that is wrapped up in with the institution of, you know, the rabbinate and the religion here. And so I think that for me, I think just taking one day at a time and talking with people that, you know, maybe have a different viewpoint than you. And I think that that's definitely taught me to be able to hear different sides of the story, and to also try to get people to just, you know, see and be open that everyone deserves that opportunity.
Nathan?
So I'll echo what Nati said. I haven't up until now, but also I want to just be like blunt out there that I haven't had the same experience as other people, because coming right before COVID, so there hasn't been so much opportunity to get out there. But what I will say is, I don't think that I've had so many challenges here necessarily, but kind of like the daily thing that goes through my mind, obviously, is no matter how much we feel at home here, and I love that I feel at home here, there still is the sense, you know, in terms of government and policies and whatnot, that Israel may not be the most accepting. And it's not to cover that up. Like, no one should ever cover that up and make it seem like it's the most perfect place. But on the other hand, I felt, for me personally, that it was better for me to feel at home in a place and feel part of the community and want to fight for those policies and fight for my rights, if you will, than be back in a place where I didn't necessarily feel that and didn't feel connected to the place enough to want to become integrated and make a change. So it's something that kind of drives me every day, that although it's not the perfect place, nowhere is the perfect place. And if in my lifetime I can make any impact here and help make a change, that's what I'm going to do. And that's what I want to be motivated to do.
Nathan. Alex, you touched on this a little bit in your opening about the school system and stuff. Is there anything else you wish you want to add? Do you want to say that there's something else that maybe has changed, or a different challenge?
So I think specifically, I think it's really important to echo the fact that, you know, there's a difference between the challenges in the personal and social life and then the legal challenges that queer people face in this country. Because the legal difference is much, you know, more drastic than the social everyday interactions. And I think that that's what's most jarring for the community here, is that despite, you know, maybe a social tolerance or social acceptance, there's still a great deal of legal issues to work through in terms of, you know, marriage, adoption, rights of couples, adoption rights, surrogacy. There's a list. So I don't want anyone who's here to think that we're painting this, you know, beautiful image with rose-colored glasses, that everything here is perfect. I think we should be realistic and say, you know, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I, for the most part, am able to live, you know, a life where I can work and have dignity as a trans person, and where, you know, queer people are able to live our lives openly. But there are still, you know, obstacles to overcome. And I think that, you know, as much as, you know, there's politics behind it, I think that there's, you know, definitely a social sense of acceptance, even if that sense doesn't reflect the rights that all LGBTQ people have from the government.
Roy, would you like to add, and maybe also touch on being a father as well, in this kind of this sense of the legality and whatnot that we've been discussing?
Sorry, who?
Roy?
I'm not a father.
Oh, I apologize. I thought you were. I apologize.
No. But yeah, I kind of try and keep up with what's going on. Again, the legal issues that we have here at the moment are the discrimination in adoption laws, discrimination in local surrogacy laws. We have an election tomorrow, so maybe these things will change soon. Maybe they won't. We'll have to wait a month for a coalition to be built to find out. The other thing that is a bit of an issue, especially for this last year with COVID, is the inability or the lack of civil marriage in Israel. That's not just an LGBTQ issue. It's a problem for something like 600,000 Israelis because we only have a religious marriage here. For Jews, it's controlled by the rabbinate. And of course, as an Orthodox organization, they are not going to be performing marriages that aren't Jewish enough for them. This is one of the reasons why, correct me if I'm wrong, Yisrael Beitenu, which has the political party that has a lot of Russian supporters, is very pro-civil marriage, not because they're gay-friendly necessarily, it's because a lot of Russian immigrants to Israel can't marry here because the rabbinate doesn't respect or doesn't accept their Jewishness. So in the past, people have just popped overseas, as you do. If you've got enough money, you can pop to Denmark, pop to Canada, pop to the UK, wherever, you can get married. You come back with your marriage certificate apostilled, and you take it to the Interior Ministry, and they will update your ID cards, and you will be legally married in the eyes of the Israeli government. We can't or haven't been able to travel overseas recently. And so online marriages have become a thing. There are places like the state of Utah in the US, sorry, I don't have to say in the US, where they actually perform online marriages, and Israeli couples have been doing that. But unfortunately, the Minister of the Interior is a Haredi member of the Shas party, and he has basically put a stop to recognizing online marriages for now. That I'm confident will be overridden once it gets to the courts, okay? But that's going to take however long it takes. So Israel is legally bound to recognize marriages performed overseas. So that must include online marriages. If you're planning on making Aliyah, it's going to make life a lot easier to get married first and then just bring your marriage certificate here, and you'll be recognized the moment you step off the airplane and you get your ID card, and it'll say that you are a married couple. Okay.
Thanks, Roy. Just to add to that as well, obviously, if you are an LGBTQ couple and you have children or you adopt outside the state of Israel, when you come back to Israel with said child or children, they too are automatically recognized by the Ministry of the Interior as the children, and both parties are recognized as the parent. There's been a lot of movement forward, specifically in this realm of the idea of non-heterosexual couple parenting in Israel, even now in the IDF, as well as in some local municipalities, on forms that talk about, children that relate to children. You have the option the form says parent 1 and parent 2. It no longer says mom and dad. And there are quite a few municipalities in Israel that are slowly moving towards recognizing unmarried LGBTQ couples as married, which means that they give them the same rights that a married couple would have with everything connected to the municipality, be it discounts in municipality tax, registering children for educational platforms and whatnot. I'm just checking What cities and towns would you recommend for LGBT couples to live and start their life? That's a question that's been asked a few times. As I said, I'm a big Jerusalem fan, and I really find my life here very happy and easy. I think if you're on the religious leaning spectrum, I would say, not only Orthodox, but if you're very into kind of having a religious atmosphere, it also adds and it helps. I think this is kind of open, so feel free for everyone to jump in with kind of where you would recommend any other ideas, communities specifically.
So I'm going to jump in because my illustrious city was voted the #2 most LGBT friendly in Israel this year. So I will definitely recommend Rishon LeZion. Rishon is a really inviting city, And I think that, you know, we do have we do have a nice sizable queer population in the city. Maybe not so much a visible, you know, queer locations, but a very large queer community. So if you're not running to Tel Aviv, I think Rishon is a city not to be overlooked. And it does have a sizable, you know, queer population. And I will say, as a teacher in the public schools, also in Rishon, I do have a lot of couples who are same gender couples with their students enrolled in our schools. So, you know, my students are always very happy to tell me about their moms. And I think it's a really nice city to raise a family and to get started as a couple, if that's your intention.
So I live in Tel Aviv, so I would put my vote for Tel Aviv, but there's also towns around Tel Aviv that are also gay friendly. Ramat Gan has definitely increased its presence over the last couple of years. The current mayor, I was going to say rabbi, the current mayor of Ramat Gan has been very, very LGBT friendly. And I think 2019 was the first time that Ramat Gan had a pride. It wasn't a march, but it was an event in June. So that was 2019. Give a Time is also very LGBT friendly, and all of the towns around Tel Aviv. I'd also put a word in for Haifa as well. So Haifa has an LGBT center as well, a very nice community up there. We run events up there, or used to, and will do again. Yeah, Jerusalem definitely. Beersheba is nice. It's smaller, has an LGBT community and an LGBT center there as well. Kfar Saba has a new center, an LGBTQ center, opened up within the last year, if I remember correctly. So there are communities all over. We have a member who lives in Carmiel, which is kind of Haifa plus, further north, and she loves it there. She says it's like, you know, she's surrounded by forests. She knows that there are other lesbian couples there. Not a huge LGBT community, but you know, it serves her quite nicely. She's very happy to live there.
Okay, an answer kept getting brought up a few times. We'll just tackle it. It's not a direct LGBT, it's just a general Aliyah question. People want to know how long your Aliyah took. So maybe Nathan, if you want to talk about that.
Sure. So I think it very much depends on where you're at in life, whether you're young or older, whether you're single, have a family or whatnot. I'm probably giving like a classic Nefesh B'Nefesh answer here and saying that they recommend to start the Aliyah process between like 6 to 12 months before you're planning to make Aliyah. And I see Josh here nodding his head, so I know I'm correct. The process in general, I mean, physically like paperwork and whatnot, can sometimes take time and be bureaucratic, but in my opinion, that wasn't the longest part of it. It's also the planning. It's like two separate issues. You know, you have to submit your application to Nefesh B'Nefesh. You have your interview with the Jewish agency Shaliach. There's paperwork here and there that you have to do, and it mostly takes time to get it processed and get you back an answer, but on your part doesn't take so much time. In my opinion, it's a lot of the planning of, you know, right now during COVID, obviously no pilot trips, but I always say like really getting to know Israel before you just jump up and move, knowing kind of what we've been talking about, what kind of community you're looking for, you know, what is the job scene, what kind of professions can you go into, networking, where you're going to find an apartment, all these different things. Are things you can do here, but I think that's the longer part to really think through and be able to plan and be prepared for when you come. And then the second that you get your visa, you can really work with the flights team and come whenever on all different types of flights, and then have the support when you get here as well to make sure that you're really executing whatever your plan was.
I just wanted to add to that. I had a slightly different experience, mostly because I had to get here for a certain deadline for a job. So when I contacted Nefesh, I think I was just under the 6 months. And I said, look, I'm really sorry. And if there's anything you can do, I'll be super efficient. And Nefesh was amazing. They got me here like with under the time that I should have. I remember that I worked with the flights team and they immediately put me on a flight as soon as they could. So even though don't do what I did, try and take your time and really make the decision. But if you have like an urgent need to come here for whatever reason, if you talk to someone and just really explain the situation, that they can really make it happen. So yeah, so for me it was much quicker, but I think it's not everyone's experience.
Thanks, Nathan and Maddie. I'm just going to add that obviously now with Corona flights, a lot of things are slightly different, as Nathan has mentioned. But if you're thinking about Aliyah, you're considering Aliyah, do not hesitate at any point to reach out to Nefesh B'Nefesh. There's people who reach out, and we have an incredible team of pre and post Aliyah advisors who are willing to speak to people and are available to speak to people whenever they need. You can email, you can call, and even if you want to just talk about Aliyah, discuss Aliyah, thinking Aliyah, never feel worried, oh, I'm only thinking about a year from now, should I reach out? Reach out, open a file, and you're always welcome to reach out and get in touch. You can also email aliyah@nbn.org.il, and you can go to our website. You can read tons and tons and tons of information about Aliyah. You can start kind of understanding and following for yourself what you want to know when it comes to Aliyah. So we have a few minutes left, and I think we're just going to finish off with something like a nice little anecdote as well. It's always good to finish with something nice. I think if each panelist in 30 seconds just share with the group what their favorite part about living in Israel is. And Alex, let's start with you.
Okay, I'm not good at following directions, and I saw a question. I want to make sure it's answered. Sorry. So there was a question about someone asking about being non-binary in Israel, and I am not non-binary. I'm trans. I'm very binary. However, I do have a lot of friends who are non-binary, and I do want to say that I think the biggest thing is to remember that Hebrew is a gendered language, and that's a very big barrier for people who are non-binary to figure out how they can feel a comfort when it comes to speaking and communicating in Hebrew, in a language that does have a very clear gender division when it comes to almost every word. So I think it's really just something to consider before making Aliyah. That's not something to discredit as a reason not to come. I think it's more so just something to be aware of. And a lot of people as well are not so in tune with non-binary identity in Israel. It's I'm not going to say it's not unheard of, but I will say it's not as commonly spoken about as it would be in the discourse, let's say in the United States. So I think, trans awareness, yes, we have Dana, but we don't so totally have a grasp on non-binary identities in this country. And I just want to be realistic and say that most people that you encounter in Israel will probably not have such a clear idea as to how to address that identity. And I think it'll take a lot of self-negotiating to figure out how you feel comfortable in public spaces, presenting or what the version of verbs and words you're comfortable with. And I think a lot of non-binary people in Israel culturally default to the feminine. That's a pretty common practice. But again, that might be something you're not comfortable with. So I just want to explain a little bit of just my background information about that. Sorry, Josh.
Alex, you're the best. You're literally the best. Thank you so much. I appreciate you tackling that question.
Yeah.
Nathan?
So Alex, thank you for that great answer, but also giving me some time to think, because I still don't have a good answer. But what I will say, I can't pick one thing about how great it is to be in Israel, but what I will say is I remember before I made Aliyah, how I was just so ready to, leave the college scene, finally make Aliyah and everything. I remember reading a post about someone saying how, does anyone else feel this way, that when they're in America, they just don't feel like they're fulfilled and they're living their true self in life. But when you're in Israel, you do. And this is unrelated to LGBT, Jewish, not like just any piece. And that is my favorite part about being in Israel, because when I read that, I couldn't find any other thing before I made Aliyah that just explained why I was making Aliyah and what I felt when I was here. And so I think that's my favorite part about being here in Israel, is just feeling like I'm living my true fulfilled life that I've ever wanted to.
Thanks, Nathan. Roy?
not much in the way of an anecdote, but I just think one of the reasons I like living here is just not having to explain why I need a day off work because it's a Jewish holiday, and then getting into a whole big long conversation about what Rosh Hashanah is or what Hanukkah is. Oh, it's a Jewish Christmas, and just not having to have those conversations anymore. It's just nice being. I've come from growing up and being a minority in a minority, being Jewish and gay, and now I'm just a minority in a majority. Okay, so that's an improvement. And if my plan comes to fruition, we'll be a majority very shortly.
Natty?
So kind of something that I'm sure maybe people have heard before, but that being in Israel, there's such a sense of community, and that even though there are a lot of different groups and sometimes they don't always like each other, if someone is in need, everyone steps up and they really take care of each other. So that's something that's been pretty amazing to see and be a part of while being here. But I would also say from kind of a different point of view, being here has really opened my mind to just different perceptions, thinking. I think it's really taught me to trust myself and see what I'm capable of. I mean, living in a country where you don't initially know the language and having to navigate that, it really gives you courage to be able to get around and to do things. And I would also say that, just that you learn a lot about yourself, and whether it's your Jewish identity, your LGBTQ identity, being in Israel. And I think it's a really wonderful experience that you should at least just give a try. And you can always, move somewhere else if you don't want to stay. But it's been an incredible experience, and like I said, I've learned a lot about myself, and I think it's something that everyone should experience.
Alex, anything you want to add?
I love having the final word. Thank you. So I would say, really the capstone experience for me is really being able to be a part of a community, but in the sense of being a teacher in a community here. And I think that that was the reason I made Aliyah, is because, working with my students really made me feel that I was part of something bigger than myself, and part of something that fulfilled my Zionist vision for what I wanted from my life. And, working as a teacher in the public schools here in Israel has really been something that, has really made me feel committed to a life in Israel. And it's been, a fun experience of meeting my kids and adjusting to teaching in a different country. But it's a really meaningful thing just, on Fridays when my kids leave the classroom and they all say, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, as they're leaving the class. And, that we, can communicate about things that are important to us as Jews in the school as well. And so I think that's an experience I feel very grateful for, that I'm able to live in Israel in this period of time where we can be together in a country and have our shared values and history and have our communities. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Roy, Nathan, Natty, Alex, thank you so much for taking time and being our guest. It was wonderful to share the screen with such beautiful, inspiring, wonderful people. And to all of those who joined us, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for trusting us and joining us and being part and letting us, share our stories and our ideas and our experiences. Feel free to log on to nbn.org.il, where you can see all the recorded sessions that have been going on during Aliyah Inspired, and they cover a range of topics from basic Aliyah 101 to specific things pertaining to different fields of work, education, communities, and so on and so forth. For those of you watching and that are going to celebrate, I wish everybody a Chag Kasher V'Sameach. You should all have a wonderful Passover, and we should all know freedom, both in our religious and in our personal lives. Once again, to my guests, thank you so much. And to all of you watching, thank you for joining Nefesh B'Nefesh on this panel with this really important topic. Have a wonderful evening and make good choices.